From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
In honor of Military Appreciation Month, Verizon thought of a lot of different ways we could show our appreciation, like rolling out the red carpet, giving you your own personal marching band, or throwing a bumping shindig. At Verizon, we're doing all that in the form of special military offers. That's why, this month only, we're giving military and veteran families a $200 Verizon gift card and a phone on us with a select trade-in and a new line on select unlimited plans. Think of it as our way of flying a squadron of jets overhead while launching fireworks. Now that's what we call a celebration, because we're proud to serve you. Visit your local Verizon store to learn more. $200 Verizon gift card requires smartphone purchase $799.99 or more with new line on eligible plan. Gift card sent within 8 weeks after receipt of claim. Phone offer requires $799.99 purchase with new smartphone line on Unlimited Ultimate or Postpaid Unlimited Plus. Minimum plan $80 a month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months. Less $800 trade-in or promo credit applied over 36 months. 0% APR. Trade-in must be from Apple, Google, or Samsung. Trade-in and additional terms apply.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. May is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, a time to honor the histories, cultures, and the contributions of AANHPI communities across the United States. But this year's celebration comes amid growing backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in schools, workplaces, and government. In Kentucky and beyond, what does that mean for Asian Americans right now? What challenges are rising? And what conversations are we still not having? Today, we're joined by two civic leaders who bring both lived experience and professional insight to these questions. Voices you might recognize from LPM's podcast, Where Y'all Really From? Charlene Buckles is the Development Director for the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union of Kentucky, with over 20 years of experience working on immigration rights. A proud Filipina Kentuckian and first-generation immigrant, she grew up in northern Kentucky and earned her degree in political science from Transylvania University. Before joining the ACLU, she worked with the Kentucky Governor's Scholars Program and taught early childhood education, focusing on diversity and equity in the classroom. Charlene has held roles in fundraising and strategic planning with organizations including Neighbors Immigration Legal Clinic, the New Americans Initiative, and the Louisville Coalition for Immigrant Support. Charlene, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
State Representative Nima Kulkarni is an immigration attorney also joining us and the first Indian American elected to the Kentucky legislature. She represented Districts 40 since 2019. Representative Nima was born in India and moved to the U.S. at the age of 6. She earned her bachelor's degree in English literature and an MBA in entrepreneurship from the University of Louisville, and later received her law degree from the University of the District of Columbia. She founded the Indus Law Firm in 2010, which focuses on immigration and employment law, and also launched the New Americans Initiative, a nonprofit that supports and educates immigration communities across Kentucky. Representative Kulkarni, thanks for joining us on Track.
Thanks for having me.
Since this is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, what does that month really mean to each of you personally?
So as the only AAPI legislator in the Kentucky House, it is something that is deeply personal to me. I actually met Charlene after we did a vigil after the Atlanta shootings, and 300 odd people showed up at Waterfront Park with a couple of days' notice. And that showed a level of solidarity that I don't think had existed before, or at least that I wasn't aware of before. And immediately after that, the thought was we need to create a space for AAPI voices and how best to do that. And so I spoke with May Surmick, I spoke with Dan Wu, who looped in Charlene, and we started that podcast to really focus on AAPI voices around Kentucky. So not just Louisville and Lexington, but we had guests from all over our Commonwealth. And so personally, I think it is imperative that we hear these voices, hear these perspectives and experiences, because it is something that is very woven into our culture, not just nationally, but here in Kentucky as well.
And it was clearly needed, too, because that podcast was one of the fastest growing here at LPM.
Absolutely.
Charlene, what about you?
For AAPI month, I feel like we get this question often, but for being AAPI, I mean, we celebrate that all year round. Of course, there's also like Filipino Heritage Month, and I'm sure many folks who have like the quote unquote month will say, it's all year round. But I think the month really highlights, like Nima was saying, that solidarity, that other folks, we can invite other folks in that month. I mean, my children, of course, they have many, many, many books from AAPI authors that are surrounded all over our house, and we want to always highlight those and be able to tell the story of our immigration story coming here. Many Filipino authors from those books, and one of the really awesome things that my son recently told me is that there's a great local bookstore here that highlights AAPI authors, and he was just so proud to see so many of those books that we have at home highlighted in one of the main showcases in this local bookstore. So, I think for solidarity is defined in bringing others in, and then also my sons and my daughter being able to see themselves elsewhere and seeing that solidarity. So that's kind of what I try to highlight during this wild month of May.
What bookstore? I'm curious.
There's one that's called When Lola Visits, and that's a really wonderful one. There's another one that made me cry the first time I read it called Balikbayan Box, which is the story of Filipinos and how we ship things back home to the Philippines. So there's a lot. There's lots of them.
Yeah, of course. Well, you kind of said something. You sort of touched on this, Charlene. This community includes many different cultures, languages, histories, but sometimes they're all grouped together as one. Do you think Kentucky does a good job recognizing those differences and meeting the unique needs of these different groups?
I think Kentucky is very different in many parts of the country. Let me just share, too, that, I was born in the Philippines, and then we moved to California around the time I was around 5, and then we moved to Kentucky when I was 7. There is not that many Filipinos here in Kentucky. But that being said, we did have a really good community in Northern Kentucky of Filipinos. But I had to really expand my identity because it's a predominantly white state, a predominantly white high school that I went to. And so when I saw other Asians, no matter where they were, they're like, oh my gosh, we're friends. We have this common experience, I think, within the state of Kentucky. And so I've always had to kind of expand my identity and carry those multitudes of, being Filipino, being Asian, being an immigrant. And because there's not many of us and we kind of need to band together in this shared experience that we have here in Kentucky, where oftentimes the discussion of race is between white and black, which is, very, very equally important. And it's I think that especially in the South, those stories are incredibly, and that history is incredibly important to recognize. But also to say we're here as well. And so I think that for many years, I've had to expand that identity. And so for me, it's okay that we are grouped together. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we all have our various differences and we all have our different culture differences. Like next month, there's a really wonderful Filipino Heritage celebration on June 14th that the Crane House is holding. And I know that in the Indian culture, there's many high holidays that have happened the past couple of weeks. And so I think that it's really awesome and wonderful. And I think that we can admit that humans in general can hold both the individual and the collective.
Absolutely. Nima, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really profound what Charlene just mentioned and the solidarity and having to expand her own sense of identity. I remember when we first moved to Louisville, I was, the only brown kid, right? Everybody else was black and white. The Indian community at that time was not as big as it is now. I think it's the largest Asian population in Kentucky anyway. And the AAPI population generally, I think, is a little over 1%. So it's not huge, our immigrant population isn't huge, and our AAPI population is specifically, much smaller. It's a fraction of that. And I think that kind of leads to everybody wanting to be in solidarity with each other. I'm not a huge fan of these acronyms because you lump people together, you lump experiences together, languages, cultures, perspectives, and histories. But in a state like Kentucky, I think it's important that we recognize that we exist and that we're growing, right? And it's important for us to support each other because there are so many different cultures that are doing their own thing in silos. I mean, there's so many holidays in Indian culture that we could be sharing and having fun all throughout the year. It doesn't just have to be in May that you think about it or like seek these experiences out if you're not from that community. And I think there's something to be said about inviting other cultures, whether or not they're Asian specific, to really participate in that. And I think that's something that's a beautiful part of growing in Kentucky.
I love that.
And just to kind of play off of what Nima was saying, I mean, there's not that many of us. It is only 1% or 1.8% of the population in Kentucky. But when you do the math of that, I think it's like 250,000 people, and that's a lot, and mostly concentrated in northern Kentucky, Lexington, and Louisville. Not to say there's not others, but that's a lot of people within those specific areas. And so that's a little bit what our podcast highlighted. Like, what we heard over and over again from our guests was just that this is an amazing podcast. I didn't realize that I'm not alone in this state and in this experience.
So talking about the podcast, where y'all really from, in today's climate, how do you think these communities in Kentucky are navigating, the tension of that question, where y'all really from, especially when it comes to cultural identity, safety, and belonging?
Go ahead.
Nima.
I think in this, that's a big question, right? That's a really big question. I think that is something that every immigrant community, every foreign-born community, every immigrant looking or sounding right person in our Commonwealth is dealing with, and of course across the nation, because the uncertainty and the chaos that is surrounding our immigration system and the way that we're talking about and treating immigrants in this country is alarming. It is an erosion of due process. It's an erosion of our immigration laws, which aren't great to begin with. And it is something that we should all be vigilant about, even if we think we're safe, right? I'm a citizen. I was naturalized, but I was not born here. I don't know what that means for this administration tomorrow. The idea of birthright citizenship being removed or eliminated is something that I know I'm going off on a tangent, but it's something that I think harkens back to the Supreme Court case, right? Wong Kim Ark. It was a Chinese of Chinese descent, but born in the United States, and the Chinese Exclusion Acts. He left and came back, and they were saying you can't come back in because you're of Chinese descent, and because of these Exclusion Act. The Exclusion Act, which only was repealed in 1943. And so I think it's something that is, it's a history, right? And it's a consolidation of everything that this country has done to immigrants in the past. And so people are afraid. And when people are afraid, they tend to retreat into themselves, into their own cultures, into their own little safe spaces. And so this expansion of identity and feeling like we're in solidarity with each other kind of goes away because nobody wants to put themselves out there because nobody feels safe. And so I think that navigating that is difficult, but I do think podcasts, I think putting stories out there, sharing voices so that people don't think that they're alone is critical at this point, so that people don't simply just shrink away from what is happening to everyone else around them.
In my experience, for a while, at least in my silos of communities, it was always the narrative was always like, that's not us. That's, we've came here in different means. We did this. We went to the consulate, we got the visas, whatever. We did the whole process or what have you. And I think that at least for the AAPI community, we thought for a while, this is, or the common narrative, true or untrue, was just like, this is not us. But I think seeing what's happened the past 4 or 5 months And then also seeing, I think one of the breaking points is seeing and hearing about the first plane that was shipped off of immigrants shipped off to Panama. It was predominantly folks of Asian descent. We're seeing that we're not off the table. And then also realizing, too, of the horrible stories that are happening around the country and the different raids and the different ways that people are being kidnapped and taken to wherever across the country, Louisiana, Texas, that those that are being targeted are those that are perceived undocumented. And I think that's a very critical term that we've been using in the immigrants' rights community, is just how, you will never know if someone is documented or undocumented unless they carry their documentation with them, because as we have been talking about, most people group brown people together, or those that are not, quote unquote, not from here. And so that perception of undocumented, that's racial discrimination, right? And so, but Asians are not off the table. If you have an accent, if you have almond-shaped eyes, if you have a last name, you are not off the table of being stopped by ICE. And if you are not carrying your passport or your documentation, how many of us are doing that on a regular basis, you can be put into detention, basically, especially as we're seeing the erosion of due process. And so I think here in Kentucky, it's been really comforting, I think, knowing that because we have already for many, many years have been able to expand our identities, to be able to relate to each other in this experience, we were very quickly able to come together and to be able to navigate this space together, which just feels safe. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of highlight at this day, in this moment right now in American history, that we can't live in the silos. We have to be able to form these communities and form, allyship to keep each other safe.
There's some parallels to what you're saying. You're talking about different legislative things that have happened. Now, I'm really curious about how recent federal and state level changes to DEI policies have impacted the AAPI communities in Kentucky, particularly in areas like education, housing, or workplace protections.
Yeah, I mean, DEI, right? It's another acronym. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion, which those three words by themselves are great. They mean great things. There's nothing wrong with diversity or equity or inclusion. I think what we are seeing is lumping all of that together in a way that is race-based. So, and it is about education. It is primarily about education, because if you're not learning about the history of this country, the actual history of this country, you're not ever going to progress past the racist structures and the racial barriers that exist between communities. So that's white, black, Hispanic, Asian. It doesn't really matter. And I think one of the things that we have to be very careful about is when we just start saying DEI and removing those initiatives or dismantling those institutions that are teaching the actual history of this country through that lens, that we are doing a disservice to a generation, at least, of Americans who are not going to be able to accurately understand their own past and move forward, into a viable and sustainable future, because everyone else in the world is being taught history. We need to make sure that we have the most comprehensive understanding of our past so that we can work towards a more, again, inclusive future. I think one of the things that we need to think about as well is the socioeconomics of all of this, right? So if you can afford a private school, if you're able to go to college, you might get that history, you might get that education. But if you're trying to dismantle it in public schools and you're trying to say it's a bad thing for children to learn about their own history, I think that is a very dangerous precedent. I think it's something that is years in the making in terms of strategy. This is not something that just popped up out of nowhere. This has been an initiative for a lot of people for a long time. And it's not been implemented because it doesn't make any sense. There's not enough people that want to say, I don't want to teach my child the actual facts. But in this world where we find ourselves, facts are debatable. What is a fact? What is reality is debatable depending on the source of that fact or the source of that perspective on reality. And I think all of that is incredibly dangerous, especially when you're talking about DE&I and our most vulnerable populations, because it is going to be Black and brown communities.
I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives being eroded in public schools and in our education system, I think ultimately the people that suffer are our children who are going to be competing in 10, 20 years in a globalized world. People want to think that America is this island that, but at the end of the day, our children are going to be in the workforce with other nations, with other talents from other countries. And so if they don't know the history, and I will say personally, growing up in a public school in rural Kentucky, there was not an emphasis on Japanese internment. I didn't really even know what happened in Japanese internment until I was in college. And it was a huge disservice for me because I didn't know my history, but then also just the impacts of what that meant in international economy and what that meant in just general, business economy when we're learning about the markets and what happened in the fallout of that in the 90s and et cetera, et cetera. So just the reality of, forget, any of the horrific, being able to have diversity, equity, and inclusion, but just generally the real implications of what that means to prepare our children for the real world and be globalized citizens and to be actually competitive in markets and on the job force when you have AI, you have all these different things, and you have to be on the cutting edge of creativity, of actual intelligence, and just knowing real data. So it's really, really unfortunate. Am I, as a Filipino American, surprised by it? No, not necessarily. I think that the conversation of model minority and things with API culture and things like that, for survival, we've had to adjust and to assimilate and almost forget our histories. There are many, many scholars, Filipino scholars generally, that are trying to even document, indigenous culture in the Philippines because it was just eroded by colonization. And so I'm not surprised by it. I think the question is how are we going to pivot? How are we going to change strategy? Because this work has been going on for, being able to know our histories, being able to understand the context and be true to who we are. That work has been going on for decades, right? The work doesn't stop for immigrants' rights. I've been doing this, we've been doing immigrants' rights for, 20-something years. And so that work doesn't stop. What changes is the strategy. So I think the question that many AAPI folks are dealing with and Brown, Black, Latinx folks are really dealing with is how are we going to continue? How are we going to persevere and tell our stories in an authentic way? And a lot of that, as Nima was saying earlier, a lot of it is representation. A lot of it are shows like this to really highlight stories and the real impacts of some of these policies.
Well, we'll be back with more in a moment. You're on track with Louisville Public Media.
In honor of Military Appreciation Month, Verizon thought of a lot of different ways we could show our appreciation, like rolling out the red carpet, giving you your own personal marching band, or throwing a bumping shindig. At Verizon, we're doing all that in the form of special military offers. That's why, this month only, we're giving military and veteran families a $200 Verizon gift card and a phone on us with a select trade-in and a new line on select unlimited plans. Think of it as our way of flying a squadron of jets overhead while launching fireworks. Now that's what we call a celebration, because we're proud to serve you. Visit your local Verizon store to learn more. $200 Verizon gift card requires smartphone purchase $799.99 or more with new line on eligible plan. Gift card sent within 8 weeks after receipt of claim. Phone offer requires $799.99 purchase with new smartphone line on Unlimited Ultimate or Postpaid Unlimited Plus. Minimum plan $80 a month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months. Less $800 trade-in or promo credit applied over 36 months. 0% APR. Trade-in must be from Apple, Google, or Samsung. Trade-in and additional terms apply.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. The U.S. produces 13 million barrels of crude oil every day, enough to fill 800 Olympic swimming pools. But what is that oil used for? The gas we put in our cars is just the beginning. Nearly 50% of each barrel is refined into gasoline. Another 34% is refined into fuels like diesel and jet fuel, and the rest is used to make more than 96% of our everyday essentials, like the tennis shoes you wear, the cell phone you rely on, and medicines that help save lives. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our modern lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit ittakes.energy.com.
Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. We're talking about the state of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities in Kentucky during a month dedicated to honoring their histories and contributions with Charlene Buckles, the Development Director for the ACLU of Kentucky, and State Representative Nima Kulkarni, founder of the Indus Law Firm and the New Americans Initiative. Now, earlier, we talked about your podcast, Where Y'all Really From, that highlighted various aspects of AAPI life in Kentucky. From that experience, what approaches do you believe are effective in fostering a more inclusive and understanding environment in these communities? And what would you suggest to someone listening who wants to be a better ally or advocate for equity beyond just this month? Nima, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were very deliberate about in that podcast is not limiting it to Louisville and Lexington. So we had guests, right? One of the first things that we did was each of us, people that we knew in our communities or through our networks, all around Kentucky. So not limiting it to just the sort of urban centers, but looking at Eastern Kentucky, looking at Western Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, and highlighting different communities, right? So not just Chinese, not just Filipino, not just Indian. We wanted to make sure that there was a diversity of geography and of the voices that we were hearing from. And that includes also the background. So they were not all from one industry or in the same line of work. And I think what that taught us is that these folks exist and are doing work and great work in their own communities, right? I met so many people through this podcast, and I know Charlene did as well, who are amazing and are doing their own just amazing work with not just immigrants' rights. And it doesn't have to be you out in the street protesting or anything. I mean, just doing the work on a day-to-day basis, just being there, being in the room, sharing your perspective, just knowing who you are in that space, wherever it is crucial. Because you represent and speak volumes just by being there. And I think that is very important to highlight. I think that doing that at a time like this is especially important, right? So highlighting those types of voices, people that aren't going to put themselves out there, right? That are not going to seek out the limelight, that are not going to want to be necessarily out in the public eye, but their stories and their perspectives and their experiences are so vital. Because as we've seen with any community that's been marginalized in the history of this country, hearts and minds are the thing that wins people over, right? Your statistics and your data, I could talk all day long about the contributions of immigrants, about the contributions of our AAPI community, but that's not going to sway somebody like knowing their doctor, right, is an Indian and they like their doctor out in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, you will find these pockets of trust and a foundation of community in the most unexpected places. And I think just knowing that exists in the Commonwealth everywhere, in every county, I think that is really important for people to realize and to celebrate.
Charlene?
I think I'll speak first to allies. For those that are not perceived as undocumented, I think what Nima was talking about was showing up and continuing to show up is so critical at this moment, and asking the question. I've had many messages and texts throughout the last couple of months asking, how can I help? Where do I show up? What do you need? And where can I go? And so there are many ways to do that. I think that, some of the most powerful images that we've seen and recently, from Tennessee is that you had families that were just completely devastated, not knowing where to go. And then you also saw dozens of allies, again, white allies that were just showing up angry. And that is how you do real radical change, is that we come together and feel this pain together. And I'll also say, too, one of the solutions, and well, maybe not solutions, but one of the things that we could really do is just how we speak about this work and how we speak about, immigration. The top 5 countries that immigrants from Kentucky are from are Mexico, Cuba, India, Guatemala, and Philippines. And so that those are all ways that we have left our families, that we have left our languages, our cultures, these securities, and we're coming here to make a home, and for various reasons, typically not by choice, quite honestly. And then the other thing I'll say, for those that are perceived as undocumented, really find your people, find the places in which you feel safe, and expand that if you can, and trying to find joy in this moment right now. I think celebration is super important. Laughter is super important, because we know this story way too well. Most immigrants know this already way too personally. And so know that your joy will never be taken away, and to lean into that as much as you can.
Well, Charlene, Nima, thank you so much for being here on Track.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Charlene Buckles is the development director for the ACLU of Kentucky, and State Representative Nima Kulkarni represents District 40 in the Kentucky House and is the founder of Indus Law Firm, focusing on immigration and employment law. She also launched the New Americans Initiative, a nonprofit supporting immigrant communities across the state. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK, or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Until next time, you're on Track with Louisville Public Media.
In honor of Military Appreciation Month, Verizon thought of a lot of different ways we could show our appreciation, like rolling out the red carpet, giving you your own personal marching band, or throwing a bumping shindig. At Verizon, we're doing all that in the form of special military offers. That's why, this month only, we're giving military and veteran families a $200 Verizon gift card and a phone on us, with a select trade-in and a new line on select unlimited plans. Think of it as our way of flying a squadron of jets overhead while launching fireworks. Now that's what we call a celebration, because we're proud to serve you. Visit your local Verizon store to learn more. $200 Verizon gift card requires smartphone purchase $799.99 or more with new line on eligible plan. Gift card sent within 8 weeks after receipt of claim. Phone offer requires $799.99 purchase with new smartphone line on Unlimited Ultimate or Postpaid Unlimited Plus. Minimum plan $80 a month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months. Less $800 trade-in or promo credit applied over 36 months. 0% APR. Trade-in must be from Apple, Google, or Samsung. Trade-in and additional terms apply.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. Did you know that the majority of progress the U.S. has made in reducing emissions over the past decade has come from the oil and gas industry? With more electrical power generation now coming from natural gas versus coal, the air we breathe today is cleaner than it has been since the 90s, according to a report from the EPA. Clean-burning natural gas is also a reliable source of power for more than just our electrical grids. It is also used to power data centers, hospitals, schools, and so much more. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.